Good afternoon and welcome to another day of the Road to Recovery, the Road to Freedom with Mark. It's nice to see you all again, and I hope you enjoy my shows. What I've done is I've written a new story. I've done about 11 stories now. This would be the 12th. So, something fresh and new. And my plan is over the next 5 weeks or so is to bring you a new story each week. The long-term plan is to publish a book in a couple of years' time. So, things are progressing well. This brings us to 100 pages or so. So we're getting there. We're certainly getting there. But the show is not just about stories about my life and some of the good times that happened. The reason I write these stories and the reason I do this whole thing is to remind me of times that were better in my life, to remind me and to show you the good times that are to be had, and to remind myself and to tell others that depression is not necessarily always all downhill. Unfortunately, I've got depression and bipolar, and it's a double whammy sometimes, and I go pretty low sometimes for extended periods of time. But over a period of time, what I've learned is to be more mindful and to be patient. It's very, very easy to get frustrated when you suffer from mental health. It's extremely stressful, and sometimes you pop really easily. You get really angry, and it seems so damned unfair. And it is, it is. There's no doubt about that. But what I've found is patience is the key. I remember a friend of mine, Aruna, saying to me, it takes as long as it takes. And that's a difficult thing to handle, to not know. You see, we're creatures of logic, and we like to know when and how and why. But unfortunately, sometimes those things just quite simply are not there to be had. So it's really just a matter of trying to be patient, seeing a doctor, getting some decent drugs, because although there may be a side effect or two, I would suggest that it's better to be in control than out of control. And the next thing, especially for me, was to start setting a few goals, just simple, basic, achievable goals that you can relish in. You can feel better once you've actually achieved something, and it snowballs. You achieve one small thing and you are on the road to recovery. And the other important thing is friends. To get your friends to stick by you, you only need even one decent friend who you can talk to. You don't necessarily have to unload on them. Just good conversation. Talking to yourself all the time can be a little bit of a danger, and you can end up getting cabin fever, and it can be quite harming. So it's good to get out. I mean, we are social creatures, and even if you can do something with a friend, like go for a walk down by a river. I find rivers very healing personally, and I really find that they're quite magic. Each one of them is always different, and it's something that I take great comfort in. Right, well, it's time to get on with today's story. I hope you like this one. It's a little bit different, but it reminds me of a wonderful, wonderful time I had. This one's called The End of the Road. The West Coast has always held a fascination for me. From the 90 to the fjords of that spectacular side. The East has always been my favoured side, but the West always calls and challenges you. So I knew I had to go there, through the top gorge, the Buller, and out to the West Coast at the top, but I was to be delayed unexpectedly. At the time I was living in Pahiatua with my dog Diamond, me and Diamond Dog. I had just finished doing up and selling my house in Wainui for a good profit, but ended up having a breakdown. I had then bought a ute, computer a huge trailer from my friend Keith, and a few other bits and pieces. I then bought my shop and flat in Pahiatua, moved 17 trailer loads of junk in, and taken on looking after Diamond Dog, a crazy mongrel that seemed to suit me well. I took to the retraining of the dog, already 3 years old, and reading maps, dreaming and planning. With the dog, I really got into the outdoors and came up with the idea of going on an extended camping holiday with my hound. I kept coming back to the west coast on the map. I had not really been south of Westport on the road, and it soon became apparent the road was calling me. I compiled a huge and comprehensive list of all the gear I would need, mostly fishing, diving, camping and cooking. Then I systematically packed all the gear in fish bins and packed them perfectly in the huge tough tray of the ute. On top of the bins I put my rods and a single foam mattress, all covered and held down with a tonneau cover. Perfect. I wasted no time packing, knowing I had already packed everything I could possibly need. I had planned that part well. As far as the journey itself, I had only planned to drive to Blenheim, then through Renwick, the Wairarapa, St Arnaud, then left after Murchison down the 65 to Springs Junction on the Lewis Pass, where I hoped to catch up with an old friend, Tar. I had hoped to catch up. I had a fantastic trip down from 3 a.m. to the ferry from Wellington at 6. A great crossing through the sounds I fell in love with as a child. I stopped in Blenheim for lunch and stores. The dog and I filled up with pies. It was great to retrace my steps through the vineyards to Renwick, then blast down the straight roads of the interior with the CD blasting out and the warm wind in my face. Past the north shore of Lake Rotuiti and the south side of Kahurangi National Park, and left after Murchison down to Springs Junction on the Lewis Pass. It was late by the time I got to Springs Junction. It was dark and grey. Everything was shut, and it was obvious I wouldn't be catching up with Tar. So I unloaded the fish bins under the ute, brewed a coffee, and crashed out with the dog on the tray of the ute. The foam mattress was super comfortable, the tonneau kept me dry, and sleeping in my sleeping bag with my back to the dog kept me warm. The next day I headed up to Reefton, and was just so struck with the place. Many of the early buildings were still standing, real gems, and I spent the day enjoying coffees, walking the dog in the park, and exploring the town. As an old gold mining town, it was steeped in history and was the first town in New Zealand to have electricity. In the afternoon, I stumbled upon a strange old hardware store and struck up a conversation with the owner. The conversation turned to gold panning, and he told me he panned the Anungahua which ran through town. He also told me of a spot just out of town called Slab Creek Hut, where I could go gold panning and camp for a night or two. So I bought a Mickey pan from him and headed to the spot, which was so beautiful I knew straight away I had to set up camp and pan for a while. On arriving at Slab Creek, I noticed a wide dirt track heading up a hill. It led to a flattened area out of sight where pine trees had been cut and loaded up many years ago. The flat site had become overgrown with broom, and I found a protected flat patch amongst the broom, perfect for a campsite. I set up a perfect campsite hidden up there, with the tarp on the ground, then the tent, then a tarp over the tent, tied to the broom, providing a waterproof cover and protected area outside for my camp lounge and kitchen. Weka had spread throughout the undergrowth, and Diamond Dog had great fun chasing them through their tunnels, but happily never managed to catch one. I made a wonderful fire that night and drifted off to sleep, serenaded by the weka and the moorpork. Over the next week I donned my wetsuit every day and headed up the creek to a large boulder that I thought might bear some gold. Every day I dug my way down into the riverbed, panting as I went. Diamond Dog sat on the track some 20 metres away like a sentinel, patient and unmoving. I was worried she would attack passing strangers, but was rapt when I saw her let them pass without aggression. Being a pit bull cross, pretty solid and intimidating, with a bit of an aggressive mental streak, I had to watch her closely to avoid her harming anyone stupid enough to challenge me or her. She was so well behaved, and we spent some of the happiest days of my life, panning for gold and camping in the bush. After a few days camping, I decided to head back to town in the evening for a beer. The dog watched the ute while I had a couple of pints and won $500 on the pokies. Thanks to that wonderful win, I had a steak dinner at the pub every night, a few pints and a half a dozen beers to take back to camp. It was just paradise. Unfortunately, dogs were not allowed into the campgrounds, so the dog and I had to live at the creek, which in many ways was better. I also spent a bit of time driving around Reefton, photographing its wonderful old buildings, places of history, the river and the railway station, and so on. After a wonderful week in Reefton, I headed off with a few flakes of gold and memories I will never forget. I headed back up Highway 69 to Anungahua, then followed the Buller to the turn-off just before Westport and out to the coast at Charleston. I blasted down the coast at quite illegal speeds, past Punakaiki. The CD whammered it out full bore. As I got to the Grey River, the sky turned dark and I realised what an appropriate name Greymouth has. I stopped at Greymouth for lunch and my dog bit some wanker who came too close when I was eating. I loved to share my burgers with the dog, but made sure I didn't give her too much grease. I checked out the map at Greymouth and decided to head down the coast through Hokitika and Ross, then inland on Highway 6, then back out to the coast at a place called Okurito Lagoon. It was an inspired choice. Right, going to play you a little something now. It's Jeff Beck and his mate, Manic Depression. I hope you enjoy.
Manic depression is touching my soul. I know what I want, but I just don't know how to go about getting it. Feeling sweet feeling drops from my fingers. Manic depression has captured my soul. Woman so willing, the sweet cause in vain. You make love, you break love, and it all seems the same when it's over. Music, sweet music, I wish I could caress all my tenderness. Now manic depression's a frustrated mess.
Welcome back to the Road to Recovery, the Road to Freedom with Mark. I hope you enjoyed that song. I cut it just a fraction short because I want to squeeze this in today, and I'm not so familiar with this story the first time I've read it, so it'll be a little bit slow. The others I know like the back of my hand. I'd just like to say a special thank you to T.G. McCarthy Trust, New Zealand On Air, and all the other wonderful sponsors that help the show out. A big thanks to Wairarapa TV. Thank you for coming on board, allowing us to do this show. It's really great. And especially big thanks to Michael and Veronica, who have supported me for many years doing this show and allow all of us, the minority, who would not otherwise have a voice, a chance to say our piece. And we're not necessarily all that eloquent, and we don't necessarily have all the answers, but what we can do is share some very real and personal experiences. This is not an easy thing to do. You know, turning up and pouring your guts out publicly is quite a tricky thing to do. It takes a bit of courage and a fair bit of tenacity to keep doing it, and it is in many ways a privilege for us all to be able to share our stories, and hope that it does some good for people out there. I certainly hope this helps a few people. I'd also like to say hi to Lynn and Karen and Brett. I didn't realise that my rallies have been watching my show. It's kind of spooky and uncomfortable, but yeah, it's flattering too, I guess. So thank you, especially to all the sponsors. Keep up the good work, and, you know, Arrow Radio is a not-for-profit organisation, something unique and special, a community radio that does great service, and, you know, it's just a joy to be part of. It really is a privilege. All right, back to today's story, which is called The End of the Road. There was a very basic campsite at Okarito. Just campsites and fireplaces, but to its credit, it also featured a kitchen, dining room, toilets and showers. Just perfect. I walked Diamond Dog down the beach every day, fished for and caught rig and collected firewood. The rig, a type of very nice eating shark, were large and plentiful. The dog and I had all the fish we could eat, and the greedy hound could eat to her heart's content. At night I would light big fires all night and get on the piss and smoke dope with foreigners touring the beautiful south. I remember a young English couple who were particularly fun, and I think they will remember our couple of nights together as the best of their New Zealand holiday. I spent a wonderful week at Okarito beneath the magnificent Southern Alps. Honestly, it moved my soul. Franz Josef was just down the road, so I stopped there for lunch and to visit the glacier. I was amazed at how busy the town was, with choppers constantly flying rich visitors to Fox Glacier. I drove up to Franz Josef and was very happy to be greeted by Mountain Kia, but was shocked at just how far the glacier has receded. From Franz Josef, I followed Highway 6 down to Haast, the last town of any significance on the west coast. I stopped at the Flash pub for a beer and a feed, resupplied and blasted down the road through Hannes Green as the trees created the most incredible green tunnel as I neared the end of the road. From there through Neil's Beach to Patterson Inlet, where the road finishes. As it turned out, no one lived there. There were only unoccupied buildings belonging to fishing companies, a wharf and a few commercial boats, anchored in a small bay. Some clever buggers had set up a mobile fish and chip shop there, so the dog and I had a good feed, then headed back to the last point of habitation, Neil's Beach. I cruised around my Butte Commodore Ute with its great V6 Buick engine. The place was little more than a lightly populated village on the south side of the Arafota, but it had the most magic feel to it. As I cruised out, I noticed some units that looked like tourist accommodation, so I stopped for a look. Pretty soon Grant rocked up and introduced himself as the owner. I liked him straight away. Turns out he was a fisherman, my favourite kind of people, and he lived just down the road. He offered me a great deal on one of the units, which had a kitchen, fridge and a good shower. Then he asked me to come down to his shed to have a beer with his mates. I unpacked and wandered down the road with a dog, and as soon as we got there, Diamond Dog got tongued up by one of Grant's mates' little dogs. We had a great laugh, and that helped with introductions to a great bunch of locals and a group of old guys who regularly come over from Queenstown. They were a great bunch of older guys who loved the West Coast, whitebaiting, fishing, eating crays and getting on the piss with their mates. Nice. We had a few beers and traded a few yarns. Then Grant invited me to come out the next day to pull a couple of cray pots for a feed. Of course, I jumped at the chance. The next day, we cruised round the corner of Patterson Inlet and pulled 2 pots. I could not believe my eyes. In each pot, there were about 18 magnificent, huge buck crays. It took only 10 to 15 minutes to get back to the inlet, and we headed back to Grant's man cave and steamed a heap of crays in an amazing gas-fired steamer Grant had made out of a metal beer keg. Grant was not just a fisherman, but an incredibly capable mechanic, engineer and entrepreneur. The 8 of us drank beer and scoffed huge crays all afternoon until I was fit to burst, so I thanked the lads and headed back to my unit. Before I left, Grant gave me 2 huge crays to scoff later. What a hell of a nice guy. When I got back, I had a shower and a few beers, but couldn't face any more crayfish. So I decided to give the 2 massive crays to Diamond Dog. To my astonishment, the greedy hound scoffed a lot, shells and all. Not often do I sleep so soundly, but that night was just so sweet. Even the hound slept soundly on the tray of the ute, a first for an animal that normally couldn't bear to sleep alone. For nearly a week, Diamond Dog and I walked the beaches down the bottom of the coast, at least 8 hours a day. We searched for shells and greenstone and were utterly tuckered out at the end of the day. We fished for rig and walked for miles and miles, and I never felt so close to my dog. We formed a really close bond, wandering along the beaches and up the incredibly beautiful rivers that flowed through awesome native bush. My favourite river was the Wairarapa, which finishes in the most magnificent blue as it nears the sea. The end of the road turned out better than I could have hoped for, and Grant and his mates were so warm and welcoming, I found it hard to leave. Grant shook my hand, said goodbye, and told me I'll never be back again. I assure you, my friend, one day I will. From Neil's Beach, the dog and I blasted up the coast to Hokitika and had a good look around that sweet little town. I spent a whole day wandering around, checking out and photographing the incredible works of art the local carvers have turned out of greenstone. There were magnificent works of art there, going for as much as 10 grand, which to my mind was still cheap for how beautiful, rare and wondrous they are. That night I got pissed up at a local pub and stayed out the back with a dog snoring at the foot of my bed. From Hokitika we shot back up the coast to the Bulla, just south of Westport, and headed inland along Highway 6 to 63 and crashed a night just outside of St Arnaud on the north shore of Lake Rotoiti, falling asleep to the call of the moorpork. From there we headed home, and on the ferry out of Queen Charlotte I had that sinking feeling in my stomach I always get when I leave that beautiful place. When we got home, I spent quite a while looking back through the photos I took of that trip. It was one of those ones that delivered everything I could have hoped for. It's a place I know I just have to get back to again. The end. Well, that brought back some mighty fine memories. You know, we are blessed with not just a beautiful country, but it's very wild and very beautiful in places. You know, and it changes a lot as you go down that coast, especially the west coast of the country. North and South Island, it can be so very, very different. I'm sure quite a few of you are familiar with the Kapiti Coast from Waikanae down, and, you know, it's a pretty nice, tame stretch of water for the most part. And then you go down to the top of the south, you know, to the top of the west coast and the south, and boy, oh boy, is she a wild and rugged place. Really something special, and I would recommend that everybody who can make it goes down there for at least a cruise. You know, it's a wonderful trip going down from Karamea all the way down to Westport. There's a beautiful stretch of the coast, but if you can manage to get all the way down to the bottom, boy, what a special place it truly is. Really, really magic. And I don't know when I'm ever going to get back down there, but I know someday I will for sure. It's a place you just can't stay away from. Well, that's me. I hope you enjoyed today, and I just want to remind you, if you can be the difference maker and help someone suffering from any kind of mental health problem, then, you know, be that difference maker, and you never know, you just might save a life. Thanks. We'll catch you next week. Bye for now.